come in the past to visit with us, and she always has such a great, entertaining program. And a few years ago, she was telling me about this book she's writing, and it's on the murders of northern Wyoming and Sheridan, and it just sounded fascinating to me, so I asked to see if she could come and give us a little tidbit of information about these murders. And I don't know when the book's going to be published, but we're hoping sometime.
I don't.
Yeah, you there.
I don't know when it's going to be published either, so hopefully soon. All right, well, thank you very much for being here today. I can't, if you've heard me before, you know I can't memorize anything, so I do have a script. But from websites and podcasts to television programs and best-selling books, true crime seems to be all the rage these days. For me, it's been all the rage for about 50 years. Ever since the late 1970s, when I first heard that my great-grandmother had shot a fellow right between the eyes and was sent up the river on a charge of voluntary manslaughter, I've been researching the homicides that occurred in Sheridan County. After literally years of research, I discovered that at least 89 violent deaths took place in what was, or soon would be, Sheridan County between 1880 and 1940. Oops, I left out a picture. If I had decided to write only about Sheridan County, my research would have ended years ago. But no, I had to go down a rabbit hole and expand my research area to include the 5 counties that surround the Bighorn Mountains: Johnson, Sheridan, Bighorn, Washakie, and Hot Springs. In other words, north central Wyoming. Okay, I'm not doing very well here. Excuse me a minute. Aside from a fair maiden being tied to the railroad tracks by a dastardly villain, nearly every scenario dramatized in television westerns, Hollywood movies, or pulp magazines occurred in our part of the state. Who among you has not been entertained by one or more of the following while munching on some popcorn? A gunfight over a campfire, a child protecting his family's ranch with a shotgun, an ambush in a lonesome canyon, an outlaw killing a lawman, or vice versa, a pair of cowboys dueling over a woman, a mob of vigilantes storming a jail in search of an accused murderer, a lone woman threatened with a fate worse than death, a woman quietly going mad and attacking her family with an axe, 2 miners shooting at each other over a valuable claim, masked men robbing a saloon and shooting their way out, or a drunken cowboy accidentally killing his best friend. The list of Western cliches could go on, but for today, let's just look at the last 4, all of which happened in northern Wyoming. I just realized what happened is I am missing an entire page of my script because it printed on both sides. And I didn't know it. Here we go. Some of the most famous what's that? Oh.
It still sounds like me.
Some of the most famous names in the West were involved, or were allegedly involved, in homicides that took place in north central Wyoming. In 1879, famed Army Scout Frank Gruard fatally wounded horse thief Shack Nasty Jim McCloskey near Buffalo's Fort McKinney. Gruard was not charged in the killing as he had been performing his duties as a law enforcement officer at the time. Colorado's accused cannibal, the infamous Alfred G. Packer, was suspected of killing 22-year-old Harry Phillips in Buffalo in 1882. While Packer had been arrested with the young man's belongings in his possession, and even though witnesses picked him out of a photo lineup, Packer was never charged with the crime. Butch Cassidy's friend Harvey Logan, also known as Kid Curry, allegedly killed Deputy Sheriff William Dean in a shootout west of KC in April 1897. Although several witnesses said they knew who the shooter was, the coroner wouldn't let them say who they suspected, and the coroner's jury concluded that Dean had come to his death at the hands of parties unknown. It was thought by not identifying Logan by name, he would not come to anyone's doorstep seeking retribution. Dozens of lesser-known outlaws and lawmen, plus a couple hundred normal, everyday citizens, were involved in the homicides that took place in north central Wyoming between the end of the Indian Wars and the start of World War II. Okay, now I can get back to where I was. That list of Western cliches, that could go on and on, but for today we're going to talk about the last four. The woman going mad, the two miners, the masked man, and the drunken cowboy. By the way, I need to apologize for the lack of historical images in today's presentation. Unfortunately, most of the folks involved weren't captured on film. So when needed, I borrowed some appropriate images from our friends on the World Wide Web. There we go. The woman who quietly went mad and attacked her family with an axe was Bighorn resident Mary Elizabeth Castor Perry. Known as Lizzie, not to be confused with Lizzie Borden, the 34-year-old homemaker was described as a mild-mannered, inoffensive lady, active in the church and well thought of by her neighbors. Natives of Kansas, Lizzie and her husband, James Newton Perry, had come to Bighorn prior to October 1883. Joining them were her brother, Noah Castor, and several of Newt's brothers. The Perrys first settled on a homestead situated along the banks of Little Goose Creek, south of Bighorn. In 1888, Newt sold the property to his brother Eber and built another, larger home for his ever-growing family. The two eldest children, Mabel and Maggie, had been born in Kansas, while three others were born in Bighorn. Of these three, only James and John survived infancy. The Perrys were charter members of the Bighorn Congregational Church, but later switched over to the Methodist Church once it was organized. In 1885, Newt purchased a share in the Mount Hope Cemetery Company, a membership he would make use of long before he probably should have. It all started in the early morning hours of April 15, 1896. Like she did nearly every day, Lizzie got up from bed and began to fix breakfast. After working for a time, she calmly went to the back door of the family home, took up an axe, went into the bedroom, and proceeded to attack her sleeping husband. 15-year-old Maggie Perry, the oldest of the couple's four children, tried to intercede, but this only enraged Lizzie, who turned around and swung the axe at the girl. Fortunately for Maggie, the blow missed and instead tore a large piece of plaster out of a nearby wall. Wisely, Maggie gathered up her siblings and fled the home in search of assistance. After she was done with Newt, Lizzie also left the house, heading to the nearby woods where she hid out for about an hour. During that time, a physician was summoned to check out Newt's injuries. When Dr. George Simpson arrived from Sheridan, he found Perry unconscious and bleeding profusely from a number of head wounds. Nothing could be done to help him, and the 38-year-old stockman died of his injuries later that afternoon. Seeming to have no memory of her actions, Lizzie eventually came out of the woods and told neighbors that her husband had hurt himself and needed to be looked after. She was quickly taken into custody and transported to Sheridan, where it was determined that she had suffered from some sort of mental breakdown. Grave as the crime would appear upon first thought, noted the Sheridan Daily Journal, mature deliberation would satisfy any fair-minded person that the woman must have been laboring under a temporary aberration at the time the deed was done, and she is more to be pitied than condemned. Within a matter of days, county officials held a sanity hearing. Lizzie did not attend after physician Simpson testified that it might prove injurious to her. Based on the testimony of doctors, neighbors, and family members, it was concluded that Lizzie was indeed of unsound mind and was sent to the state asylum in Evanston the very next day. We're not sure how long she stayed hospitalized, but by 1900, less than 4 years later, Lizzie was out of the asylum and living with her 4 children in Jewell County, Kansas, right next door to her brother Noah, and not too far from where she and Newt had lived when they were first married. Lizzie Perry eventually moved to Idaho, where she died in 1933 at the age of 71. She was survived by her second husband, William H. Lamb, whom she had just married. There is a marked difference between how men and women who killed their spouses were treated by the courts. In addition to Lizzie Perry, several other women in north central Wyoming were accused of killing their husbands. All were either acquitted or judged to be insane at the time of the crime. Conversely, nearly all the husbands accused of intentionally killing their wives, and there were quite a few, either went to prison or committed suicide in the aftermath. There was one exception, but the details of his crime are much too gruesome to be discussed right after lunch. While Lizzie Perry killed her husband with an axe, nearly 84% of the homicides included in my research, whether accidental or intentional, were gun-related. One of the first such deaths in what would one day become Sheridan County occurred near here in September 1884. Walker Prairie, located just a few miles from here in the Bighorn Mountains, was the site of the area's first gold mine. According to the Cheyenne Democratic leader, the gold discoveries there are engrossing considerable attention, and many people believe they are of remarkable richness. As usual, disputes have arisen over the possession of valuable mineral-bearing lodes. One of these disputes involved Ben Walker, the 45-year-old Englishman who had been one of the first to discover gold in the area. He quickly staked his claim, appropriately calling it the Discovery Mine, and according to one Miles City newspaper, scarcely had his claim been staked than prospectors began to pour in from the Powder and the Tongue, from Buffalo and from Sheridan. A representative was there from Hanging Woman and froze to death, said its quota. With the new arrivals came claim jumping. One of these alleged claim jumpers was a young man named Joseph O'Neill. A former cowboy described as a peaceful, honest, and hard-working man, O'Neill had the temerity to stake a claim on land supposedly claimed by Walker, who apparently felt that the entire area had been claimed by his own self first. O'Neill's honesty was questioned, and he soon lost his peaceful nature. On the night of September 8, 1884, Walker and O'Neill, both fairly intoxicated, began arguing about the disputed claim. Separated before the fight could become physical, the men stalked off to their respective tents. In a few minutes, Walker left his canvas abode and headed toward O'Neill's tent, railing furiously about the claim. Here we pick up the story as related in the first issue of the Bighorn Sentinel. Walker followed O'Neill into the latter's tent with a gun, and hot words were exchanged. Walker, pulling a gun as if to shoot O'Neill, remarked, "I've got you now, you damn son of a bitch." And no, it wasn't spelled out entirely. There were little dashes in there to indicate, but can't spank the dashes, so you have to say, "You damn son of a bitch." And at this instant, O'Neill got the best of the gunplay, firing a gun of his own, the result of which sent Walker to an unknown camp. Although advised to surrender himself and face the consequences of his actions, O'Neill fled into the night. Johnson County Sheriff Frank Canton hunted for the young man for nearly 2 weeks, but to no avail. It was too bad, too. A coroner's jury, organized at midnight and held by the light of a campfire, found that the homicide had been justifiable as both men were drunk, and Walker had clearly been on the defensive. O'Neill had nothing to fear from the law, but whether or not this news ever reached him, he did not return to the area, at least not under the same name. Wandering around under an assumed name was pretty common in the American West. Those who had committed crimes in other jurisdictions couldn't necessarily be recognized by their appearance. Photographs didn't appear on wanted posters until the tail end of the 19th century. And written descriptions were usually fairly vague, but their names were widely distributed. Our next killer apparently changed his name several times, both before and after his alleged Sheridan County crimes. As the tracks of the Burlington and Missouri Railroad made their way across Sheridan County in the early 1890s, they were accompanied by a number of temporary businesses, dry goods stores, rooming houses, and saloons being primary among them. All were housed in tents, making them portable enough to move from one terminus station to the next. In December 1892, the north end of the track was located at Higbee, a tiny community about 4 miles north of downtown Sheridan. On Monday, December 5th, 1892, 4 men were playing poker at Case's Saloon, a tent tavern popular with railroaders working at Higbee. Just before midnight, according to newspaper reports, the doors suddenly opened and 3 men entered, a very tall man being in the lead and 2 shorter men following. The men all wore masks covering their faces, and the tall man and one of the others carried Winchesters, and all had 6-shooters. As soon as they entered the room, the tall man, who seemed to be the leader, said, "Every man in the room, hold up your hands." Seconds after their entrance, the masked men opened fire. 3 men were slightly wounded, while bartender Daniel Sullivan was fatally shot in the head. When owner Andrew Case entered the saloon, the tall leader of the gang said, "That's the son of a bitch we want," and opened fire. After shooting Case once, the tall gunman stepped closer and fired a second shot, directly into Case's heart. After stealing cash, watches, jewelry, and guns, the killers headed north into a winter blizzard. Their tracks were soon covered and untraceable. Although there were witnesses in abundance, the identities of the assailants remained undiscovered, as did any explanation for the extremity of their violence. "I can't understand why they shot us," said one man. "They had the drop on us and could easily have taken everything in sight without molestation." The Sheridan Post continued that line of thought. "Never in the history of Wyoming has there been committed a murder more foul, more unprovoked, more fiendish. The brutal killing of Case and Sullivan was so needless to enable the robbers to carry out their designs that the whole people marvel at the makeup of the trio of red-handed villains who held so lightly the taking of the lives of their fellow men. Had the men shown resistance to the robbers, there might have been some slight reason for the murders. But a man who will shoot down another in cold blood when he is unarmed and holding up his hands for pure heartlessness must put to shame the worst acts of the James and Younger brothers." While the New York Times speculated that the outlaws were desperados from the Jackson Hole country, no one really had a clue who they were, and the murders were considered unsolvable. Or maybe not. In March 1893, Deputy U.S. Marshal Thomas Smith arrested a 31-year-old man known as both Michael Fleury and Augustine Ritter. He was arrested about 90 miles north of Miles City, Montana. Smith claimed to have positive evidence that Fleury, whose true name was Gustav Dietrich Albers, was the man who had shot down Case and Sullivan. Nicknamed Timberline on account of his unusual height, nearly 6 foot 3 inches, the man indeed matched the description of the shooter. Instead of returning him to Wyoming, though, Smith sent Albers to New Orleans, Louisiana, where he was wanted for the 1889 shooting death of 39-year-old Frederica Wyman, the woman who had fostered young Albers after his parents turned him out of the family home. While awaiting trial, Albers told an exciting tale of his life as a fugitive, most of which had been spent near Buffalo, where he was known as Matt Fleury. Albers later denied any involvement in the Case Sullivan shootings. "I have been accused of many crimes," he said, "but I solemnly swear that I am guiltless of those alleged deeds of violence." Convicted of first-degree murder, Albers was put to death a few hours after making this statement. Deputy Marshal Smith never disclosed what his positive evidence was, so even if one doubts the final words of a condemned man, no proof exists as to Albers' involvement in the murders at Case's saloon, and so it remains unsolved to this day. Killing someone in anger is criminal. Being drunk and killing someone by accident is careless. But being drunk and killing your best friend by accident, that is nothing short of tragic. We're going to slide across the border to Johnson County for this one, which took place northeast of Buffalo in May 1891. Born in Arkansas in 1862, Jack Harris had worked for the Union Pacific Railroad in Laramie for nearly 10 years before going to work for a syndicate of cattlemen as a sort of animal retrieval agent. In April 1891, he and 2 other men were sent to northern Wyoming in search of some stolen horses. Unfortunately, the trip turned deadly for young Harris when he was shot in the head while riding out of Buffalo towards his camp. When word of his death reached Harris's family, it was assumed that the young man had fallen victim to members of a rustling gang who weren't willing to give up the animals they'd stolen. If that had been true, Harris would have been one of the first victims of what later came to be known as the Johnson County War. In fact, Harris's killer proved to be neither horse thief nor rustler. He was instead 22-year-old John DeHart, one of the men sent north with Jack to find the stolen horses. Described as being of boyish appearance and apparently of good disposition, DeHart had been one of Jack's best friends from the time of their first meeting. According to Jay Landers, the third member of the trio of cowboys, he and DeHart and Harris had had a few drinks before heading out of Buffalo that fateful day. "I saw DeHart have a 6-shooter in his hand," Landers said. "I heard a shot fired and looked around and saw Jack fall." A crying DeHart said, "Oh, Jay, what shall I do?" Seeing that Jack was badly hurt, Landers quickly went for help, but it was to no avail. The bullet in Harris's head had proven fatal. "He was entirely unconscious from the first," said the Laramie Boomerang, "and doubtless knew no pain." Landers said that he knew of no trouble between DeHart and Harris and had never known DeHart to be drunk prior to the day of the shooting. He thought that maybe DeHart had been aiming at a rabbit when the shot was fired. A thoroughly distraught DeHart did not testify at the coroner's inquest. According to the Buffalo Bulletin, no more heart-rending sight was ever presented than was witnessed at the inquest when poor DeHart was brought before the coroner. A big-boned, fair-faced boy, he presented a picture of utter helplessness and despair, and the sincerity of his grief was too apparent to be doubted. After the jury had retired to deliberate upon their verdict, DeHart's sobs were distinctly heard all over the courtroom. Based on the evidence indicating that he had indeed fired the fatal shot, DeHart was taken into custody. But the case was soon dismissed when it was concluded that no malice had been intended. When he left the courtroom, DeHart broke down completely and sobbed like a child. The young man seemed to feel the terrible position in which excessive drinking had placed him and undoubtedly learned a lesson that will serve him for the remainder of his life. Between 1877 and 1941, nearly 300 men, women, and children from a variety of backgrounds met violent death at the hands of another in north central Wyoming. Some of these folks were caught doing something they shouldn't have been doing. Some fell victim to humankind's basest nature, and others were merely in the wrong place at the wrong time, including 40-some people like Jack Harris, who died in accidental shootings. This region's homicide victims and their killers have historically come from all walks of life, regardless of race, creed, color, income level, occupation, gender, sexual orientation, level of intelligence, or degree of sanity. It wasn't just the poor, crazy, ugly, unemployed, and/or dark-skinned people who killed or were killed. The rich, smart, sexy, white, and/or gainfully employed ones did it too. Since I predict that this lack of trend will continue, I suggest you be careful out there. Thank you for being here today. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them for you. Yes?
Tell us about your great-grandmother.
How long you got? Okay. She moved to Sheridan in about 1909 and got a job as a boarding house, managing a boarding house in Sheridan over on Laux and Thurmond. Burkett and Thurmond. No, not. Brundage. Brundage and Thurmond. Sorry, I don't know my D streets. And she was in an affair with the owner of the house, so they were living there together. They had already been arrested for illicit fornication and hauled up before the judge and fined an exorbitant amount of money. But they appealed the ruling, and so they were sent home. And she hired a maid named Rose McCoy to help her out at the boarding house. And Rose had a husband who was not very ambitious. He didn't keep her in the style in which she would have liked to have been kept, which is why she was working. So she and her daughter were living at the boarding house. And one night in March 1910, I believe it was, Jessie and her paramour's name was Jess as well, so there's Jess and Jessie, were in their bedroom, and she heard the door open and somebody started to come up the stairs. And so she took the gun off the headboard and went out, and there was Jim McCoy, the husband of Rose, saying that he wanted to see his wife and daughter one more time before he left town for a new job. So she tells him, come on, you've got to get out of here, because there's a restraining order out. There's a whole lot that goes on, but there's a restraining order, and he had broken that. And so anyway, she's trying to get him down the stairs, and at some point, she shot him right between the eyes. And he fell and landed, and that was it. He was dead. And she was arrested and taken to jail, and she told her story that the gun had gone off accidentally or something because she didn't have any reason to kill the guy. So, but then Rose, who had originally agreed with Jesse, said, no, you told him you were going to shoot him, and you shot him right between the eyes when he was trying to tell you to please save his life. So Rose changed her story. And so my grandmother was charged with first-degree murder. And there was a lot of delays, and finally the trial didn't take place for a year. Meanwhile, she had been moved over. They got a change of venue, moved it over to Buffalo, held the trial at the the Buffalo Armory because it could hold 600 people, which were in attendance. And after all this, that, and the other, they tried to prove her insane and that it was an accident at the same time. They did both. And the prosecution said, no, we're not buying that she was both crazy and it was an accident. So the jury didn't buy it either. So they found her guilty of voluntary manslaughter, sentenced her to 14 years in prison, which she served. She was sent down to the Colorado Women's Prison in Canyon City, Colorado. And they let her, she was there for 4 years. And finally the governor paroled her into the custody of her parents in Nebraska. So they sent her off to Nebraska. Meanwhile, the sheriff of Johnson County, and who ran the jail over there, they had got to know each other during her time in the Johnson County jail. He petitions the governor that he says he wants to marry her. And she writes to the governor and says, yeah, I want to marry him too, so can we make this work? And he said, the governor said, I don't care if you get married, I mean, that's fine, but I don't want you moving back to Buffalo because that would just be a mistake. And she wrote back to him and said, no, I want to move to Buffalo because in Buffalo, everybody already knows everything there is to know about me. If I move anyplace else, there's always going to be somebody trying to say I'm running away from it, I'm trying to hide. If I'm in Buffalo, it's just out there and everybody knows it. The governor said, okay, that makes sense to me. So he handed Jack Neal a pardon and said, give this to your bride at the altar. My aunt used to say that he said, that he would pardon her as long as Jack marries her and keeps her out of trouble. But he never actually said that. But anyway, they got married, moved to Buffalo, lived there for 30-some years. When they finally left and moved to Idaho, the newspaper's going, oh my gosh, one of our favorite couples is leaving. And so that's her story.
That's perfect.
Okay, any other questions? Yes?
Do you think like Lizzie and women like her might have been abused? And that's why did they have anything about that?
There was nothing in the papers, or of course, reporting was so
Yeah.
Masculine.
yeah, everything was done from the male point of view, of course. But there was no word of that. Nobody had anything bad to say about James Newton.
Okay.
A lot of the other women that I've dealt with, it was in these stories, it's very clearly they were depressed, either postpartum depression or some sort of thing like that. With Lizzie, we don't know.
Okay. I just was trying to figure out why.
I know. That's,
triggered her.
yeah, and that's what I was trying to figure out too, but whatever, I can't remember the name of it, but there's a mental condition that takes over where it's like amnesia, but it's you don't remember that you committed a crime, so when she comes out of the wood and says, my husband's hurt himself, yeah, right, Lizzie. But no, nobody ever had a bad word to say about New Perry, so I don't know.
Okay. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I am too.
Okay.
Anything else? Yes, sir.
One of the sad things that happened on Pounder, I think it was in the 70s, was one of the cowboys that worked for Fattis Kennedy. I think there were 3 cowboys there. Max Richards was one of them. And the guy that had the main house, his wife was the cook for the crew, and then the bunkhouse set across the yard from there. And somehow this fellow in the main house got the idea that the crew was messing around with his wife, and he started shooting up the bunkhouse. And he wasn't particularly aiming at him, he was just keeping these guys in there, and they couldn't get out because there was no back door. Front door was facing the house. One of the bullets hit Max, and, they couldn't call anybody, and he actually bled to death, waiting for the sheriff to show
Wow.
up, because his wife didn't telephone by the time the sheriff got there from Buffalo, and got the guy corralled.
Yeah.
Max,
What did you say is Max who?
Max Richards.
Max Richards,
I
okay.
knew Max, he worked for Pattis Kennedy.
Oh, what, in the 1970s?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and, so that was kinda sad. Up till that time, Max had been living by himself on a cow camp up there on,
Wow.
Lone Tree Creek, I believe, out of Claremont.
Yeah.
So, that was too bad, and the thing was that he apparently didn't say anything, maybe he didn't know he was wounded that bad. The other guys didn't try to, stop the bleeding or whatever.
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of stories of husbands shooting suspected paramours, and
Mhm.
suspected paramours shooting husbands, and a few wives shooting husbands. No wives shooting wives though, so I thought that was interesting. But yeah, there's a lot of, I stopped my research in 1941. I found out that a lot of people didn't want to talk about their parents and their grandparents, or anybody that might still have, they just didn't want to talk. So I went ahead and stopped in 1941, and the number of murders and the stories behind them from 41 to today is amazing. When you look at the lady who killed her 3 children over in Byron or Cali or wherever it wasn't the first time that had happened in our region. A woman killed 4 of her children outside of Lovell in 1920 something. So there's nothing new as far as these crimes go. Oh my goodness.
That was pretty close.
What'd you do
Yeah.
with the body?
Nancy.
Well, Jim reminded me of Jim Averill, who was a soldier in Buffalo and accidentally or killed the guy or
Intentionally killed him.
did, or the guy died, but
Yeah.
that was quite the story because
Yeah. The interesting thing, he was never prosecuted for it. The Army put him he was in the Army jail at Fort McKinney for a while, then they transferred him to Fort Steele, and, or they transferred him to Rawlins, where they said he was in prison, but in the census that year, in the 1880 census, he was listed as being a guest in the home of such and such, who was a jailer at the Rawlins State Pen, but he wasn't in the pen at all. Then they transferred him to Fort Steele, and he left the Navy, or the Navy, the Army shortly thereafter. But yeah, Jim Averill's is such an interesting story, that he had such a successful Army career, shot a guy over because the guy was hurting a woman, and that's why he killed him, because the guy had knocked this woman down, and Jim said, "No, you're not going to do that." And so they got into a spat, and there was a couple of run-ins before the final run-in. But yeah, Jim Averill, he, in case you don't know the name, went on to be one of the first 2, was the Hung with Cattle Kate down the Sweetwater, and kind of the start, so they say, of the range wars. But anyway, so yeah, important Johnson County story.
yeah, and my great-grandfather gave money for his defense in Buffalo. He was one of the businessmen who
Yeah,
paid to defend him.
cool.
But
Did I see it? Yes.
Can you elaborate at all on Pearl Logan's sister that shot someone in
Yeah.
Java Moon and?
Yeah, Geneva Collette. This is 1926, I believe, and Pearl Logan, as you may know, ran the Rex Hotel, which was, or the Hotel Rex, get that right, the Hotel Rex, which was Sheridan's most prominent brothel, shall we say, yes, there on Main Street. And she had a brother, Robert, and a sister, Geneva. And her brother Robert was engaged to a woman thrice married already, and she was only in her 20s, named Tidwell, last name. No, well, she married Shorty Tidwell, but I can't remember her first name for the life of me. But what was her name? Tidwell, Maggie? Is Maggie? Anyway, let's call her Maggie for now because I can't remember. But she was engaged to Robert. She broke off the engagement, ran off to Nebraska and married Shorty Tidwell, who was a barber in Sheridan. And she thought they were headed off to to Oklahoma when she got hit with a warrant from Robert's mother saying that she had run off with $1,000 from Robert's defense fund. He had been arrested in Steamboat Springs and was in trouble in Colorado. So Maggie came back to Sheridan to kind of defend herself. She and the Collettes came to an understanding, and everything was at a lawyer's office, and everything was cool. That afternoon, Shorty and his wife were walking down the street, and she said, well, you go to the candy store, I'm going to go into the toggery shop and pay a bill that I know is there. And so she went into the toggery shop, which is there where Java Moon is now, and was paying her bill, and Geneva Collette walks in, whom she'd just seen at the lawyer's office half an hour before. Geneva says hello, Maggie says hello, Geneva takes out a gun and shoots Maggie 4 times and walks out the back door, leaves Maggie laying on the floor. Shorty's wondering where his wife is, so he comes in the front door of the toggery shop, and there's his wife laying on the floor, dead. So Geneva goes to a nearby auto garage and calls the police and tells them what she did. And so they whisk her off to jail. She's charged with first-degree murder, found guilty, also sent to the Colorado Women's Prison because Wyoming had no facility for women at that point, although they had female prisoners. For some reason they didn't want any more. And so they sent her off to Canyon City, Colorado. On the way, she stopped in Casper to talk, and they let her out to talk to all of her friends from when she lived in Casper. Get her down to Canyon City, and before she goes into her cell, she's able to reunion with her brother, who was in jail from his Steamboat Springs crimes earlier in the year. So they were able to get together for a short while. And she served several years down, she was sentenced to life imprisonment at hard labor. First woman in Wyoming to receive such a sentence. And so she's down there for quite a while, and things got a little too expensive for Wyoming, so they ship her off to Kansas to a prison farm. And they decide that fresh air is better than a dank cell, and so these women are at this farm doing the work. And she's only there for a few months before she dies of a heart attack. And she was sent down to Sweetwater, Texas to be buried after that. But she had a very hard life. And she had a surgery that they don't say what the surgery was, but from what they're saying, it's probably a hysterectomy. They say that it affected her mind, and then she went crazy after that. And so that's why she acted the way she did. Yes?
Have you ever found where the bullet holes are in the wall of the Java Moon?
What's at the Java Moon? No, I was thinking about a different one that has bullet holes to look for, but no, I haven't. Have you?
I just know that they're supposedly in the wall,
Yeah.
the back of Java Moon by the back door.
Yeah, that could be because they said she walked to the back of the store to do the shooting. So, yeah, I don't know, I've never looked. Her sister told me a story that Steve kind of corroborated, but couldn't remember any details, that at some point somebody, I say that nobody was tied to the railroad tracks, but there was a story that somebody in one of the mine towns was sleeping with somebody's wife, and so they took him and tied him to the track, let the train cut his head off, and then untied him and threw him in the river. Do you know anything about that?
Wasn't me.
Okay, well, this would have been in the 20s during Prohibition, but I haven't found a thing that addressed that at all, but I just thought I'd ask.
Yeah. Well, that's, yeah, we were pretty lucky that Jim was about half blind and wasn't a very good shot, that's all I got to say.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.